It can't be. They're talking. Savannah's office fell into silence as Samuel Hayes opened the door. On the walnut desk, the triplets leapt barefoot, feeling every vibration pulsing from the flashing speaker. Clarissa, in a simple blue dress, swept her arms gently, her eyes glowing as if she were conducting an invisible orchestra. A strange, extraordinary moment shattered the wall of silence that had cloaked the mansion for 6 long years. What had truly taken place on that desk, and how had it forever changed a millionaire's family? It was a house that anyone passing by would think must echo with children's laughter, the murmur of adult conversations, the gentle clink of dishes at a family breakfast. But the truth was different. The only sound was the slow, steady ticking of the clock on the high wall. Samuel Hayes, 42, strode firmly down the hallway. His tie sat slightly askew. Silver threads streaked through his slicked-back hair, and a thick file was clenched in his hand. He looked more like a man about to walk into a tense meeting in Atlanta than a father of 3 children waiting for breakfast. He had grown so accustomed to silence that it felt like the permanent backdrop of his life, the white noise he no longer noticed. At the long dining table, Noah, Nathan, and Nora sat pressed close together. 3 faces eerily alike, gray eyes, light brown hair, yet no one spoke. They quietly tore pieces of bread, dipped them into bowls of milk, and set them down again as if it were a ritual. No laughter, no playful shouts, only fleeting glances exchanged before their eyes dropped. In another family, breakfast might mean squabbles over jam jars or pancakes secretly tucked into pockets. Here, the silence was so thick it seemed one could hear the spoon touch porcelain. Once, a newly hired gardener had absent-mindedly whistled while cutting the grass. He was quickly reminded, in this house, keep it quiet. It wasn't a cruel command, just a habit formed over years, as if noise itself was something foreign to be shut out. The house had not always been this way. 6 years earlier, it brimmed with light and laughter. Hannah Samuel's wife had turned every room into a sanctuary. Piano melodies drifting softly, hydrangeas blooming in window boxes, the kitchen alive with the smell of fresh bread. But the day she was lost in a difficult childbirth, the laughter died, and the Savannah estate became a giant shell, echoing only with the whisper of the sea wind. Samuel convinced himself that his children were not like other kids. Noah, Nathan, and Nora never responded to his calls, never answered when he tried to speak. To him, they were a silent mystery. He called it a defect, a burden no one wanted to name. Instead of finding a way into their world, Samuel turned his back, burying himself in land deals and multi-million-dollar contracts that stretched late into the night. Upstairs, in his office, he built a massive desk piled with blueprints and contracts. Each morning he sat there early, staring out at Savannah's gray-green shoreline, telling himself he was building a future for his children. But the more contracts he signed, the further he drifted from Noah, Nathan, and Nora. In rare moments he would pause outside their room and see them sitting in a row, eyes fixed on the wall, small hands fiddling with wooden toys. A thought of Hannah would flash, only for him to push it away. Feelings were a luxury. Contracts were reality. The seaside mansion became a symbol, grand on the outside, hollow within. The polished wooden floors gleamed, chandeliers sparkled, yet no one could remember the last time laughter filled those halls. Even the neighbors whispered, calling it the silent house. Sometimes, on the rare evenings Samuel came home early, he would pass the living room and hear the waves crashing beyond. A fleeting thought would cross his mind. Was he truly living with his children, or merely sharing a roof with 3 silent shadows? He dismissed it at once, poured another glass of whiskey, and returned to his reports. But beneath that silence, there were things he did not see. The children were not empty. They had a language of their own. Glances exchanged, feet tapping rhythms no one else heard, fleeting smiles that vanished when their father turned away. A whole world was unfolding, if only he had the courage to open his eyes. And then, one morning, Samuel would happen to step through his office door and witness something that shattered every belief he had clung to. What happened in that moment transformed the mute house into a place where a new language took shape, changing this family forever. Dear viewers, pause for a moment and hit subscribe before we continue with the heart of the story, but only if you truly feel a connection with what I'm sharing here. And leave a comment below telling me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. It's always moving to see people from all over the world joining us. The Savannah afternoon poured down like liquid honey, gilding the entrance to the seaside mansion. The iron gates swung open, and an old pale green car rolled slowly inside. It wasn't a Bentley or Mercedes like the ones people were used to seeing in this millionaire neighborhood, but a worn Honda, its windows faintly scratched. The driver was a young woman with softly curled hair, a face free of heavy makeup, and sneakers still dusted from the road. Clarissa Monroe arrived like a strange new breeze, simple, unpretentious, and natural. No one in the house imagined that a young teacher from Atlanta could bring change. To Samuel Hayes, this was nothing more than another trial run, a short-term contract to fill the gap left by the long line of nannies who had quit. He hardly glanced at her resume, merely waved his hand in agreement. But Clarissa was different. She came not with lofty promises, but with a canvas backpack, a few books on sign language, and a heart seasoned by years of silence with a younger brother born deaf. The first time Clarissa met the children, they sat in a row on the sofa, eyes fixed on the floor, their small hands clutched together. Not a sound. Even when she greeted them with a smile, only the ticking of the wall clock answered back. For a moment, Clarissa felt like she had stepped into the frame of a black and white silent film. But instead of faltering, she let out a gentle laugh, sincere, not forced. The children's eyes flicked upward, and for an instant, a faint spark lit at the corner of Nora's mouth, like a sliver of sunlight breaking through heavy clouds. Clarissa began with the smallest things. She didn't demand the children must respond, nor did she try to shatter the silence with artificial noise. She simply sat down, touched her fingertips lightly to theirs, and waited. When Nora pulled her hand back, Clarissa didn't rush. She quietly pressed her palm down, opened it into the shape of a heart. Nora stared, hesitated, then giggled. A fragile beginning, but enough to kindle hope. In the kitchen, Clarissa did something unusual. She pasted little flashcards with ASL symbols everywhere. The refrigerator bore the sign for M in milk. The window showed the sign for L in light. Even the cereal box carried the sign for C. The housekeeper shook her head. Who turns a home into a classroom? But Clarissa only winked. If the children can't go out to the world, we'll bring the world to them. With a hint of humor, she turned the kitchen into an alphabet board, lifting the heavy mood. One day, Noah picked up a crayon and scrawled a wide-open hand on paper. Clarissa tilted her head, sketched in the fingers, and added the sign for hello. Noah didn't smile, but his eyes gleamed. Nathan liked to stand before the mirror, cautiously copying Clarissa's hand motions, laughing when his fingers stumbled. And Nora, the most reserved of the three, burst into giggles when Clarissa signed love and tapped her chest. Samuel remained oblivious. He strode through the hallways, phone pressed to his ear, shoes tapping briskly on polished wood. Each time he entered a room, the children froze, hands hidden behind their backs. To him, nothing had changed. But once he left, Clarissa quietly resumed, weaving her invisible threads of connection, strand by patient strand. In those first days, Clarissa spent hours simply watching how the children moved in silence. She saw they had a language of their own, quick glances, a rhythmic tapping of fingers on the table, laughter that escaped only to be swallowed back down. All fragments of a puzzle, waiting for someone patient enough to piece them together, and she was ready to be that person. With her gentleness, Clarissa not only began to change the children's way of seeing the world, she altered the rhythm of the house itself. Silence was no longer a hollow shell, but slowly became a space where new signals could spark. A small flame had been lit, though Samuel Hayes had yet to notice. But what moment would finally force him to face what was unfolding under his own roof, and would he have the courage to step into the world Clarissa was opening? In the upstairs office, a strange sound rose, not the tap of a fountain pen or the shuffle of papers, but the low thrum of bass from a small speaker in the corner. The walnut desk quivered softly, carrying a visible rhythm, like a giant heartbeat pulsing through a room long accustomed to silence. Clarissa had set the music that morning, choosing a jazz piece rich with drums, yet no one in the house expected what would follow. The three children, who usually curled into themselves, had climbed onto the desk. Standing shoulder to shoulder, barefoot, they tapped their feet against the wood in time with the beat. Small hands moved in the air, eyes glowing, smiles flickering and vanishing as if afraid someone might catch them. Clarissa sat nearby, giving no orders, only guiding the rhythm with her hands in the air. Lips curved in a quiet smile, eyes filled with encouragement. She signed a single word: music. The children watched, then slowly copied her movement, awkward but uncannily in sync. The office transformed into an invisible stage, where a new language bloomed without a single spoken word. Just then, Samuel Hayes pushed open the door. He had just returned from Charleston, still in the suit that carried the faint scent of jet fuel, briefcase in hand. He had only meant to grab a file, but the sight froze him in place. On the desk, he saw not contracts or power, but his triplets dancing as if the outside world had vanished. Their feet drummed, their hands clapped, their eyes locked in a language he had never reached. Clarissa turned, not startled, only nodding gently as if to invite him to look closer. Samuel stood transfixed. Time itself seemed to stop. The bass pounded in his chest, but what sent chills through him was the image of those small hands signing the word music. For the first time in 6 years, he saw his children truly speaking, not with voices but with rhythm and eyes. A wall around his heart cracked. For years he had believed their silence was a defect, that there was no way across the gulf. But here, on the desk once buried under contracts, was proof that silence was not despair at all. It was a language no one had bothered to learn. The room seemed to shrink. Every detail, the light glinting off Nora's hair, Nathan's firm footstep, Noah's focused expression, painted a living portrait Samuel could not look away from. He felt like a stranger trespassing in his own home. Clarissa kept leading quietly. She didn't need words. She let the moment speak for itself. The confidence in her posture was a world apart from her timid first day. And when his eyes met hers, Samuel glimpsed the truth. The path into his children's world was not unreachable. It only required him to lower his pride and learn the language of their hands. He didn't know whether to laugh, to weep, or to run. All he knew was that he couldn't look away. Amid the storm of emotion, one bitter thought crossed his mind. The desk that had once borne million-dollar contracts was now the first stage where his children spoke their hearts. Outside, the Savannah surf kept rolling steadily ashore, but inside, another wave had risen, shattering 6 years of false calm. Yet would Samuel seize this moment to change or retreat again into the cold armor he knew so well? And now, dear viewers, if you find this story stirring, type 1" the comments or simply write, "I'm still here," to let me know you're listening. The Savannah sun hung high, pouring down like fire across the lawn in front of the veranda. Samuel was still shaken from the morning when he had seen his children speak through rhythm and signs. That image hadn't even settled when Clarissa laid a stack of color-printed documents on his desk. A trial schedule at the Georgia School for the Deaf, complete with photos of children laughing on a playground. The faces in those photos radiated so much life, it seemed to brighten the very room long accustomed to silence. But Samuel didn't linger. He snapped the folder shut as if it were evidence against him. In his head echoed the voice of Margaret, his mother-in-law, cold and clipped from Boston. The children need cochlear implants. They need speech training. You can't let them grow up in a world of silence. He had grown far too familiar with that voice, the voice of tradition, of social comparison. of endless admonitions. Inside him, a quiet war raged. On one side were fresh memories of small feet drumming, of eyes lit up as they signed the word music. On the other was the weight of reputation, a Florida deal waiting to be signed, and the pressure to maintain the perfect image of a millionaire family in the public eye. Days stretched tight with tension. Samuel chose silence, burying himself in stacks of contracts. Clarissa remained patient. The children grew bolder in their signing. The contrast sharpened, one side blossoming with new life, the other, the father, turning away from it. Until one sweltering summer afternoon, conflict exploded in the most unexpected way. Nathan, the boldest of the three, slipped from Clarissa's grasp as they walked through Forsyth Park. The tourist crowds pressed in, street music and vendor calls merging into chaos. The little boy vanished into the sea of bodies. Samuel charged forward, heart hammering. He shouted his son's name, but nothing came back. His voice was swallowed by the noise and by the bitter truth. The boy could not hear him. Nathan grew more frantic, eyes wide, hands flailing in the air. In that desperate instant, Samuel remembered the hand motions Clarissa had taught. He drew a shaky breath, lifted trembling hands, and signed, "Safe, Dad here." Clumsy, awkward, but clear enough for Nathan to catch. The boy's eyes lit up like finding a lighthouse in a storm. He sprinted into his father's arms, clutching him so tightly that Samuel's shirt soaked through with sweat. The wealthy man stood in the middle of the crowded park, but in that moment, all the contracts, meetings, and Boston lectures vanished. There was only the struggle of his embrace and the frantic heartbeat of the child pressed to his chest. That night, Samuel sat alone on the veranda, his drink untouched, eyes fixed on the vast dark sea. The night wind carried the taste of salt and stirred the question that haunted him. I could lose every contract, but am I losing my children? No answer came, only the gentle rhythm of waves against the shore, an echo of something unresolved. But would that moment of awakening be enough for Samuel to change, or would he once again turn away, hiding inside his $1,000,000 contracts? The first sound was not music, nor the sea breeze. It was the scrape of a kitchen chair pulled out each evening. A strange new ritual had begun. Samuel Hayes, the man once only at home at gleaming boardroom tables in Manhattan, now sat hunched over the kitchen table strewn with crumbs, struggling to fingerspell with hands more accustomed to contracts than conversation. Clarissa stood beside him, her gaze patient, her lips fighting back a smile. When he tried to sign the letter R, his fingers slipped into K. Across the table, the triplets burst into soundless laughter, their eyes glowing. Samuel furrowed his brow in mock severity, then gave in and laughed with them. In that moment, the wall that had once felt as thick as concrete thinned to a veil of wind. Evenings at the mansion no longer meant a solitary glass of whiskey on the veranda. They became small classrooms, a whiteboard propped up, sticky notes covering the cabinets. Clarissa let the children grade their father's clumsy hands. Sometimes Nora corrected him with a raised finger. Noah drew the signs in crayon, while Nathan, ever mischievous, signed wrong on purpose just to tease. Watching them, Samuel realized this was the first time in years he had heard his children laugh, not with sound but with light shining in their eyes. On a Saturday morning, Clarissa took Samuel and the children to the Georgia School for the Deaf. The first thing he felt on entering the campus was surprise. Sound was scarce, but energy overflowed. Deaf students played basketball, the ball bouncing against brick with sharp thuds, laughter flashing through their eyes. Another group painted a mural, brushes dancing like signs in color. Inside the auditorium, students presented with their hands flying in the air, and the audience listened intently with their eyes. Samuel stood stunned, as if he had stepped into a world entirely different, yet more alive than any boardroom he had ever walked through. That trip also introduced him to successful deaf adults in Atlanta. An architect signed about the buildings he had designed. A chef offered dishes crafted through memory of taste rather than sound. And a NASA scientist explained space research with a calm clarity that left Samuel in awe. Every exchange was silent, yet more resonant than any speech he had ever heard at a real estate summit. In those encounters, Samuel realized something simple yet unimaginable before. The future of Noah, Nathan, and Nora was not bleak. In fact, if he was willing to enter their world, their path could shine brighter than all the million-dollar deals he had chased. Driving back through Atlanta's glowing streets, the children dozed in the back seat, their heads leaning together, hands still unconsciously signing small shapes. Samuel glanced into the mirror, his heart tightening. Perhaps he thought this was the true wealth he had to learn to protect. In the days that followed, Samuel no longer left Clarissa to shoulder it alone. He joined everything, signing while cooking, signing goodnight, even signing reminders to brush teeth. Once he fumbled and signed banana instead of toothbrush, sending the triplets into fits of laughter. His face flushed red, but Clarissa only smiled. Mistakes are part of learning. And in that instant, Samuel felt lighter than after any contract he had ever signed. Amid the looming Florida deal and mounting pressures, Samuel discovered a different meeting mattered most: evenings at the kitchen table with Clarissa and the children. There, he was not a millionaire, not a company head, only a father slowly learning the language that let him hear his children. But could this new commitment withstand the storms gathering outside family, society, and the Florida deal burning hot on the horizon? Are you still with me, dear viewers? Take a breath, maybe sip some water, and let's continue this journey together. Comment 1 if you're finding this story compelling. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Low candles flickered, scattering hundreds of tiny stars across the ceiling. In the wide room, instead of bright balloons and blaring music, Samuel Hayes had turned his triplets' 7th birthday into something strange yet tender. The floor was fitted with vibrating panels, each bass note rippling like a breath, letting small feet feel rhythm through the ground. Golden light filtered through curtains, not harsh, but warm as a late-day sunset. The guests were not real estate partners or finance acquaintances. With Clarissa's help, Samuel had invited role models from the deaf community: an architect, a chef, a hand dance artist, and a NASA scientist. They entered with glowing smiles, hands signing greetings that filled the room with life. The 3 children stood in the middle, wide-eyed, as if they couldn't believe their world was being honored this way. They felt each vibration underfoot, giggling when the lights shifted softly in time with the beat. It wasn't just a party, it was the first time. Noah, Nathan, and Nora saw their language placed at the center, no longer on the margins. Clarissa stepped forward, her warm hand resting on Nora's shoulder, signing gently. The triplets turned to one another, then began retelling the story of their late mother. Their small hands danced in the air, hesitant, but brimming with love. Hannah's image was painted not in words, but in the light of her children's eyes. Samuel stood at the edge of the room, heart pounding. He had known this moment would come, but not that it would demand he step into the center. Clarissa's subtle nod was a signal. He swallowed hard, then walked forward. Facing dozens of eyes, both children and adults, he lifted his trembling hand. "Mom." His fingers moved slowly. A pause, as if afraid to be wrong. "Love." His breath caught, his vision blurred. "Always." No sound filled the air, but the weight of those 3 words pressed into every heart. The room seemed to hold its breath. Tears rolled down Nora's cheeks. Noah tugged his father's sleeve, signing a single word: family. Nathan, usually the mischievous one, suddenly darted to Clarissa, wrapping his arms tightly around her. In that instant, the room blazed not with candles, but with the fusion of hands and hearts. An invisible language had become a bridge between souls, long divided. Samuel felt something unshackle inside him. For years he believed he had lost his wife and the chance to connect with his children. Yet this moment proved love had never left it, had only waited for him to learn how to speak with his heart instead of sound. The atmosphere swelled. The deaf chef sliced the cake, decorating it with sugar signs. The architect handed the children a model house with ASL letters carved into each window. The NASA scientist played a video of a spacecraft launch, with sign language captions added just for them. Laughter never rang out loud, but the glow on every face filled the room. In one corner, Margaret, the once stern grandmother, quietly wiped her eyes. She had fought against this path, but watching her grandchildren shine, she could not deny that this silence echoed louder than any sound. Samuel looked at Clarissa. In her eyes there was no triumph, only the warmth of a companion walking beside him. He knew in his heart that only because of her had he found his way back to family. But a question lingered. Would the warmth of this birthday be strong enough to withstand what lay ahead, from the boardroom's pressures to society's unrelenting gaze? The great curtains in the Hayes Realty boardroom snapped and swelled under the air conditioning draft, as if trying to blow away the heavy tension inside. On the long glass table lay the thick Florida deal portfolio, its bold black numbers sharp as blades poised to cut into Samuel's reputation. Around him, the board members, men in gray suits, women in sharp business dresses, cast their skeptical looks one after another. The accusations cut through the air. He was distracted, unfocused, putting feelings above company interest. Samuel sat upright, fingers interlaced. In that moment, he no longer felt like the powerful real estate tycoon he had once been, but only a father who had just begun learning a new language, the language of his own children. Clarissa, sitting quietly behind him, gave the same small, steady nod she had at the birthday party. He rose. The scrape of his chair drew every gaze. Samuel inhaled, then for the first time combined his voice with his hands. Success, he signed slowly, speaking as he moved, does not only live in contracts. His hand closed into the shape of a roof. It lives in whether we can build homes where everyone belongs. Silence fell, not the heavy silence of suspicion, but one that forced reflection. An older board member adjusted his glasses, his eyes no longer so cold. Another scribbled notes in the file, nodding slowly. The tide shifted. The Florida project was approved at last, but with a new clause: a housing fund for the deaf and disabled community. It was a victory not only of profit but of vision. 3 years later, the seaside mansion in Savannah was transformed. No longer called the Silent House, it pulsed with life. Watercolors by Noah hung in the living room, each canvas bursting with light. In the backyard, a basketball hoop stood tall, where Nathan's powerful throw and wide grin turned every game into celebration. In the garage, Nora, fascinated by science, built a small lab with safe chemicals neatly arranged beside a model rocket. Samuel no longer hid behind his office desk. At dinner, he often signed along with Clarissa, smiling as the children competed to tell stories with quick, fluent hands. No sound was needed, the house buzzed with joy. On a late summer evening, the Savannah sea glowed bronze. The family sat on the wooden porch, hand in hand. Samuel turned to Clarissa, holding out a simple silver ring. No long speeches, just a short vow. Thank you for teaching me to listen. Clarissa smiled, eyes shimmering, while the children clapped in their own rhythm, the small audience to the simplest, most perfect engagement. In that moment, Samuel knew he had not only won a deal, but reclaimed his family, a language, and his own heart. Yet the story of Samuel, Clarissa, and the triplets did not end on the Savannah shore. In truth, it had only just begun. A father who once missed his children's laughter had learned to listen with his heart. A family once trapped in silence now had a language to connect. A house once called mute now stood as living proof of love's endurance and patience. But life rarely stays serene. The board might have agreed once, but would they support him again when Samuel expanded the housing fund for the disabled? As the triplets stepped into adolescence, would they hold on to the confidence they had just discovered? And Clarissa, the one who planted the seed of change, would she be ready to become a wife, a mother, when the world began watching their story unfold? We don't have certain answers to those questions. But one truth is clear. Sometimes victory isn't found in million-dollar contracts, but in the moment you humble yourself to learn a new language just so you can embrace the people you love. True strength does not lie in power or wealth, but in the courage to step past fear and pride, and to discover that love will always find a way to be heard, whether through voice or through hands. If you're watching this story from anywhere in the United States, maybe a small apartment in New York, a quiet town in Iowa, or along the California coast, ask yourself, in your own family, is there something waiting to be heard that you've been missing all this time? Share this story with your loved ones and friends so they too can discover the power of love and connection. And don't forget to leave a comment letting us know where you're watching from, what time it is, and your personal thoughts. Would you like to see part 2 of this story, where new challenges await the Hayes family? The journey isn't over, and perhaps you too are already writing the next chapter of your own.